Hello, this is Thelma English. I'm back for another American Lit session. This is session 11. As most of you are aware now, I have some throat issues and I'll be occasionally spraying my throat. I hope you had a good week this week with all of our reading. I hope you enjoyed everything. Let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to serve you in this way as we read more American literature by American authors and read the words that they left behind for us. I pray that we could better understand our world, the changes that America has gone through, so that we might be better Americans. We thank you for the privilege of home education and the privilege of attending this class. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Welcome back. Session 11. Who is this? Yes, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'd like you all to be able to recognize him. It is time for you to pause the video and have your volunteer read from our small collection of the Valley of Vision. Okay, I'm back. Now, remember that if you are at home studying by yourself in your bedroom, looking at this on your phone or your iPad or your laptop, that you need to open up Valley of Vision and you need to read your own devotion. Please do not skip the devotion. Schedule review here at session 11. We'll be talking about Romanticism and Transcendentalism as we did last week. You are turning in your Declaration and Constitution history paper today, and then we'll be talking a little bit about Romanticism, which I call the theology of the heart. Your Declaration and Constitution paper, I can hardly wait for your parent or teacher or facilitator to look at those and see what you've done. I hope that we have some scale drawings with explanations of the rooms and what they were used for and when it was built, etc. Hope that we have some papers on some interesting people. If you have something wondrous and fantastic, feel free to send it to me and I can appreciate it also. You know that my email is www.thelmaslibrary.com. So thelmaslibrary.com will get an email to me, and I also have a Gmail account. We are reading this week Self-Reliance. It's one of those Emerson books. My copy is the old style that looks like this. Yours may have a picture of something, but it's a Dover edition. And we're reading pages 19 to 38 because that is Self-Reliance. It's a very important American essay. There is a Thelma read aloud for that. You can see at the bottom of the schedule review, optional online, Mrs. E reads aloud Self-Reliance. It will take you 1 hour and 9 minutes to read it through with me. And we're going to look at quite a bit of it today. You need to have your copy ready today and have a pencil, highlighter, something ready because we will look at individual pages and I'll give you some key interesting from Self-Reliance. And that way, when you read it yourself or when you have me read it aloud with you, then you will catch the more important items more clearly if you've been introduced to them today. Syllabus reading 175 to 177, again, reading about poets. And what is your writing? Your writing assignment is to prepare a short essay, and I mean short, to explain the changes in thought and worldview from Puritan culture to romantic or a transcendental, which is Romanticism. Use your glossary, use your texts, use your syllabus, use everything that we have read so far and give me some quotes, please. How is Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, different from the Puritans you have read in his worldview? Use text quotes to support your ideas. This is due session 14. Normally, this session 14 is the week after Christmas when we begin again in January, but regardless, this is due session 14. Grade 7 and 8, this is a very short paper, minimum 100 words. That does not include quotes. My guess is you'll be double that. Grades 9 and 10, 130 words. My guess is you might be close to double that. Please include quotes, but the word count does not include quotes. Grades 11 and 12, you are more apt writers and 160 words than quotes. You will probably easily write at least that or double that. Again, we are writing lots of short papers, because this is the way to learn how to write papers. My own students had the privilege of sending their papers to me personally through the email, and then I would go through and review the papers one sentence at a time and make suggestions for revisions or different word usage, especially for the younger grades. The younger the student, the more help that I gave to the student, especially if the student has not taken a formal writing class yet at this point. But as all the parents tell me, for more than 20 years now, American Lit is where their students learn how to write papers. We write lots of papers, but they are short. But you're going to learn how to insert quotes, and you're going to learn how to insert long quotes, short quotes, phrases. Use your glossary, use your syllabus, use everything we have read so far. Use poetry, use everything. All right, a little bit of help for hyphenated adjectives or compound adjectives. These are two words that are used as one. Words like he was a self-educated man. Those two words are used as one. He was a self-absorbed man. He was very self-centered. He was a self-made man. He was really interested in self-improvement. He was a quick-witted fellow. She was a strong-willed woman, or a well-respected woman, or he was very well planned. His plot was well planned. He was well known, very well known. It was a 2-month plan. It was the mid 1700s. It was a dirty movie theater, or look at the difference with just a hyphen. It was a dirty movie theater. Okay, there's stuff all over the floor. It's filthy. Nobody swept it up. Or it was a dirty movie theater. It's a theater that shows dirty movies. So hyphens do make the difference, and you can start practicing that now. To write this paper, From Puritan to Romantic, and you can give it a different title if you like, you will assess the cultural changes that took place from the earliest Puritans. Think of Anne Bradstreet and William Bradford and Richard Baxter and Mary Rowlandson. Think of these early Puritans. Think of their worldview, and then watch them change. These are the changes that took place from the earliest Puritans that I've just mentioned to the early Romantic, which would be Emerson, and then upcoming shortly is Thoreau. Here's an 8th grade sample paper. It's a 3-paragraph essay, and I'm going to show it to you 1 paragraph at a time, and then my 4th slide will have the entire paper on 1 slide. And this is pretty good for 8th grade, especially considering the student has not had a formal writing class and is trying to get a grip on worldview. First paragraph of an 8th grade student. American culture and literature was shaped by the Puritans and was based on Christian teachings and customs. I really like that. That's a strong introduction. Early works such as The Day of Doom by Michael Wigglesworth and the Bay Psalm book were full of references to God. The earliest American literature, for example, Anne Bradstreet's poems, show a remarkable trust in God, even through difficult circumstances. Okay, that's really a good first paragraph. Now, how we're going to change. Second paragraph of this 8th grade student. Soon time progressed and people changed. Throughout literature, these transformations are revealed. I like words like revealed and reflected. A reduced focus on God and a smaller concern that he would be worshipped was evident as people became focused more on what was happening in the world. That sentence is a little rough around the edges, but I know what she means. The political climate wanted attention, and American authors started putting their focus on American issues. The morality of the Puritan writers was no longer the standard for America. Deism ruled as people believed and trusted more in science than in God. All right, this is short, but she knows what she's talking about. And the final paragraph, and remember, it's a short essay, so you can't say everything. You have to say everything important, and you need a strong introduction and hopefully a great conclusion. Soon the war was won. Oops, okay, here's a little bit of an issue. What war? You notice in the first and second paragraph, there was no mention of any war. Soon the war was won. Are we talking about soon the Civil War was won? Probably soon World War I. We need a little more information there. Soon the war was won, and there was a great victory, and Americans congratulated themselves. Authors began to focus on personal exploration. At this point in American history, this point in American history is called Romanticism. The Romantics did not follow the Puritan ways. They were greatly motivated by William Wordsworth, who put all of his trust and love in nature. Okay, that's a strong conclusion. It does not, we don't exactly maybe know who William Wordsworth is. She perhaps could have said, instead of they were greatly motivated by William Wordsworth, these later writers were greatly motivated by European poet William Wordsworth, who put all of his trust and love in nature. A few more words to identify that William Wordsworth is not American, that he is European. The publication of Wordsworth's 6,000-line poem, all about himself, it's not about God anymore, all about himself, is in 1798. I'm going to pause. Is Lyrical Ballads. There we go. Lyrical Ballads, published in 1798, and this is in Europe, and this was very influential. Emerson did end up going to Europe, met William Wordsworth, kind of worshipped him, and Emerson and then his disciple Thoreau introduced Romanticism into American poetry and literature. And so Wordsworth is very important because it started in Europe. It started with Wordsworth. All right, let's read the entire paper now. 3 paragraphs. We just looked at it 1 paragraph at a time, and it's an 8th grade paper, so have a little mercy here. American culture and literature was shaped by the Puritans and was based on Christian teachings and customs. Early works, such as The Day of Doom by Michael Wigglesworth and the Bay Psalm Book, were full of references to God. The earliest American literature, for example, Anne Bradstreet's poems, show a remarkable trust in God, even through difficult circumstances. As she could have said, the earliest American literature of a woman's that was published in America is Anne Bradstreet's poems. Soon time progressed and people changed. That's quite vague. Throughout literature, these transformations are revealed. A reduced focus on God and a smaller concern that he would be worshipped was evident as people became focused more on what was happening in the world. That's the sentence that I said is a little rough around the edges. Probably could be worded a little better. The political climate wanted attention, and American authors started putting their focus on American issues. The morality of the Puritan writers was no longer the standard for America. Deism ruled as people believed and trusted more in science than in God. That's really good writing for an 8th grader. That tells me, and the purpose of this paper, of course, these 2 statements tell me that this person understands the change in worldview. This student understands, and that's the important thing. Soon the war was won, and again I said, what war? Soon the war was won, and there was a great victory, and Americans congratulated themselves. Authors began to focus on personal exploration. At this point in American history, and this point in American history is called Romanticism. You could even say something like this turning point in American history is called Romanticism. The Romantics did not follow the Puritan ways. They were greatly motivated by, and I would say, European poet William Wordsworth, who put all of his trust and love in nature. And this paper was 195 words. 100 words were required for grades 7 and 8. And this 3-paragraph paper is 195 words. Now, it's missing quotes. And you're going to lose, I would guess, at least 10%. You can't get an A if you don't have any quotes in this paper. But it does have titles of works we read. And so there's a little mercy and grace there, that it does have some titles and some authors there. The transition statements to tie each paragraph to the next are a bit rough. For example, the 3rd paragraph, soon the war was won. That needs a few more words. So these short papers are forcing you, the student, to process, all right, how on earth did we get from William Bradford and Anne Bradstreet and Richard Baxter and Mary Rowlandson? How on earth did we get to Emerson? And some students, older students, will mention deism as a type of a bridge worldview, that this focus on science unfortunately meant that people quit focusing on the Bible and on God's will. The focus was so much on science that soon trust was placed in science. And when trust was placed in science, trust was not placed in God. And before you know it, you have left God behind. God's nowhere to be seen, and he has been left behind. And the natural next step that we see reflected in American literature, of course, is more of a focus on self, and that would be Romanticism. So this is really a good paper. All right, let's look at another paper. It's a 3-paragraph essay. You may be used to a 5-paragraph essay. A 3-paragraph essay is just a lot shorter. This is a grade 10 paper. The first paragraph: in the 1600s, the main focus of most literature was to glorify God. For example, the Bay Psalm book, or the works of Anne Bradstreet, or Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards said this in one of his sermons: God is the highest good of the reasonable creature. The enjoyment of him is our proper and is the only happiness with which our souls can be satisfied. To go to heaven fully to enjoy God is infinitely better than the most pleasant accommodations here, better than fathers and mothers, husbands, wives, or children, or the company of any or all earthly friends. These are but shadows, but the enjoyment of God is the substance. These are but scattered beams, but God is the sun. These are but streams, but God is the fountain. These are but drops, but God is the ocean. Okay, this is a great quote. However, this is a grade 10 student, and this quote is not cited. It doesn't say if it's from the syllabus or if we found it on the internet somewhere. It's not cited. It's a quotation, but it's not cited. Second paragraph from the same student: this focus on God lasted a while. So you can see there's a good crossover of the focus. This focus on God lasted a long while, but during the 1770s, this changed to glorifying science, perhaps winning the Independence War, and it would properly be described the War for Independence. Some people call it the Revolutionary War, but to disassociate it from the French Revolution, just 20 years apart, to call it the Revolutionary War, yes, we had a revolution, but revolution kind of implies you run in and you kill everybody and you take over. And that's really not what we did. It was our war for independence. Perhaps winning the war for independence went to the heads of the American authors, forgetting they had help from God in that war. And of course, went to the heads would be a figure of speech that's quite colloquial. Forgetting they had help from God in that war. This manner of thinking is known as deism, probably because it is spiritual but not religious. As one of my fellow students put it, the one that not long ago had been the center of their society now had been left behind. So he or she heard another student say this and quoted that student, and that should have been quoted to that student. It was more of a bridge worldview, and I liked this. I underlined it or highlighted it, and then I had him read this part in class. I really like, because I do believe deism served as a bridge worldview from the theological worldview of theism to the Romanticism worldview. Deism was a bridge type of worldview. It was more of a bridge worldview since it lasted only about 30 years, perhaps more. A well-known deistic author would be Benjamin Franklin. He wrote this in his autobiography, and he wouldn't need, this student could get rid of the word this. He could say, he wrote in his autobiography, then colon, and then the quote: my parents had early given me religious impressions and brought me through my childhood piously in the dissenting way. I was scarce 15 when, after doubting by turns of several points as I found them disputed in the different books I read, I began to doubt of Revelation itself. This is probably from Ben Franklin's autobiography, since that is the book that we read, but it needs to be quoted and it needs to have a page number. Occasionally, students who are reading electronically, they have electronic copies of, for example, Ben Franklin's autobiography, and they don't know how to do the page numbers. But I believe even electronic readers, ebook type things, will give you page numbers. You just need to say it's an ebook and the page number it gave you. Because should I need to look this up, I need to know where it's at. Now, I have turned the quotes into blue print, but I would expect this all to be in the same color, all to be black. I'm highlighting the quotes in blue for your purpose. The third and final paragraph of this grade 10 paper, From Puritan to Romantic, the one you're going to write. Then once again, in 1798, the focus once again changed. All right, that's once again, and once again, that's once again too many. So it could say, probably get rid of the once again. In 1798, the focus once again changed, this time to focusing on man's emotions. And you can tell there's a little bit of a problem there. This focus once again changed, this time to a focus on man's emotions would be correct. Henry Thoreau gives a good example. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. And this is a cool quote from Henry David Thoreau, but it's not cited. We don't know where it is. So I'm going to guess he found it on the internet, and he doesn't know where it's from or citation, so it almost doesn't count. Obviously, he has forgotten the correct way of figuring out one's way in life, since he has stooped so low to following a mysterious drum. And I'm not sure that I agree with that statement. It is okay to say that someone marches to the beat of a different drum. David Thoreau made that famous, the idea that some people march to the beat of a different drum. We all know someone who is a little bit different, either intellectually challenged, or someone who is so artistic or so scientific or such a rationalist that they do tend to live a little bit more in their own world. And I don't know that that is stooping low. May we never again forget our creator and purpose. And I suppose that's a good ending. It's not real strong. May we never again forget our creator and purpose, but it's okay. And I realize you only have a few weeks to write this paper, and you are reading while you're writing a paper, but you do have those Thelma read alouds, and you do have lots of class time information on just exactly who Emerson is. And so I do hold you to a high level of accountability. This paper was 390 words total. The paper is 205 words after removing those quotes. 130 words are required for this writer, grade 10. He is missing the quotation citations, and then this paper was double-spaced. All of these papers need to be double-spaced. For your teacher or parent to have any room to tell you what's wrong, or to respell a word correctly, or to tell you something, anything, they need places to put all of that information. They need to be able to circle a word and tell you something about it. And so do double-space all papers and just waste the paper. Just do it. Okay. Now this is, this is grade 10. This is the entire paper. Let's look at it again, and you think how you would write this paper. I've gone through it rather critically. In the 1600s, the main focus of most literature was to glorify God. For example, the Bay Psalm book, or the works of Anne Bradstreet or Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards said this in one of his sermons: God is the highest good of the reasonable creature. The enjoyment of him is our proper and is our only happiness in which our souls can be satisfied. To go to heaven, fully to enjoy God, is infinitely better than the most pleasant accommodations here, better than fathers and mothers, husbands, wives, or children, or the company of any or all earthly friends. These are but shadows, but the enjoyment of God is the substance. These are but scattered beams, but God is the sun. These are but streams, but God is the fountain. These are but drops, but God is the ocean. I like that quote the more I read that. And I kind of like it that he started in the 1600s. Now, I think if I was him, I'd start the second paragraph, but during the 1700s, and start there. This focus on God lasted a long while, but during the 1700s, this changed to glorifying science. So I think there needs to be something said about during the 1700s, the focus changed from glorifying God to the glorification of science, or glorifying science, something like that. Perhaps winning the war for independence went to the heads of the American authors, forgetting they had help from God in that war. This manner of thinking is known as deism, probably because it is spiritual but not religious. As one of my fellow students put it, the one that had not long ago been the center of their society now had been left behind. It was more of a bridge worldview, since it only lasted about 30 years. A well-known, and well-known there would be a hyphenated adjective. A well-known, because two words are used as one, a well-known deistic author would be Benjamin Franklin. He wrote this in his autobiography. And here's where I would change it a little bit again. He wrote in his autobiography, no reason to use this. He wrote in his autobiography, then you have the colon introducing the quote. My parents had early given me religious impressions and brought me through my childhood piously in a dissenting way. But I was scarce 15 when, after doubting by turns of several points, as I found them disputed in the different books I read, I began to doubt of revelation itself. If you don't believe in revelation, you don't believe in the revealed word of God, and then you're in big trouble. Then once again in 1798, the focus once again changed, and we saw that that's too many once agains. And so this time to focusing on man's emotions. Henry Thoreau gives a good example. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. Obviously, he has forgotten the correct way of figuring out one's way in life, since he has stooped so low to following a mysterious drum. May we never again forget our creator and purpose. I think this 10th grade student didn't understand about following the drum. To stoop so low, that just needs to be removed from this paper. He has perhaps forgotten the way, or perhaps did not internalize, didn't have a relationship with God. It was only through his family. May we never again forget our creator and purpose. I don't know. I think we pretty much have. Maybe a stronger statement for 2022 would be something like, may we again return to our purpose and creator. You get to write the paper, you get to say what you want. It needs to be filled with meaningful phrases and bits and pieces of information. Do use your glossary, use everything you've read in your syllabus, anything we've underlined or highlighted, do use those things. All right, this is a student I gave special permission to write a dictionary entry style. This would be the lazier, easier way. If you're in the 7th grade and you're going to go home and cry tonight about writing this paper, I think your parent or teacher ought to let you write this style. This person did not know how to talk about theism turning into deism, turning into romanticism, and they worked very hard just on this paper. So it's up to the teacher, parent, facilitator to decide whether you will allow something as simplistic as this. It's dictionary entry style, theism. In the worldview of theism, God is alive, holy, and believed to have created the world. God has made man to glorify him. God wrote the Bible with the hands of others, intending it as the basis of truth and the means to discover truth. Truth is absolute. According to the American Literature Glossary, page 17, a theist believes that man's needs supersede all of nature. It was made for him. And it might not be on page 17 because I've redone the glossary. Hence, quite obviously, nature is not to be worshipped. In the basic hierarchy of belief, and I love it that this young kid mentioned the basic hierarchy of belief, God is first, man is second, and nature is last. Nature's at the bottom. Then they describe deism. In the deist worldview, God is believed to have created the world perfectly, like the clockmaker, but then stepped back. Science now guides and teaches us all we need to know. Reason dominates the supernatural. Man is improving morally and intellectually and has little need for God. In the basic hierarchy of belief, man is first, nature is second, and God is least. Romanticism. Romanticism is theism's opposite. It heavily emphasizes the individual's feelings and personality, holding self-restraint, there's a hyphenated adjective, and holding personal restraint as an unnecessary and harmful concept developed by society. And this, I thought, was a great sentence, because the idea of romanticism lacking self-restraint is a truism for all of romanticism. Romanticism is about following your heart. It is not about self-restraint at all. And the Puritan worldview was all about self-restraint. You would never go play ball or, go enjoy something if you hadn't done your Bible reading for the day. Romanticism is theism's opposite. Okay, it lacks self-restraint as an unnecessary and harmful concept developed by society. And that's true also, that self-restraint is harmful to you. By the time we get to Darwin or Sigmund Freud especially, or Friedrich Nietzsche, he's going to say, oh, blast to those Christians. When they're self-restraint, they've made us all neurotics. And that's what will happen. Give us another 100 years. Give us to about 1900 and we'll be there. Men, let's see, humans are inherently innocent, according to romantics. And remember, a theist says we are born in sin. So humans are inherently innocent, but society has corrupted, blemished, and destroyed them. Man as a whole is viewed as an intruder, an unwelcome parasite, and plunderer of the world. Nature is vastly more important than man, taking the place of God in the medieval hierarchy conception. Uh, it is odd as a goddess and sits at the top. So what? Nature, probably nature, but you should just say it again. Taking the place of God in the hierarchy conception that had been around, you could say, for 500 years or something, because it is a medieval idea. It's odd as a goddess. Nature is odd as a goddess and sits at the top, and I would say, of the worldview or the hierarchy conception, with man second and God at the bottom, if anywhere. Okay, we could definitely use more quotes. This is pretty well written especially for a young student. It's grade 7 or 8. However, you can tell that they just had to rewrite the dictionary entries, add a little more. This person, I did believe, tried very hard. And so I don't know if they got their A that they wanted or not, but excuse me, this paper is 243 words minus the quote. That's a pretty long paper. And I think with a tiny bit of revision, this could have been made into a 3-paragraph essay rather than adopting that dictionary entry style. Look at it. I think it could have just been a 3-paragraph essay. All right, keep that in mind. Now, how are you going to write this paper? Gather your most favorite quotes and think about how you will tell it. You're going to use the glossary, you're going to use the syllabus, you're going to use everything that we have read so far. You're welcome to use any structured notes, anything like that. All right, let's do a little segment on American poets. And we have a new American poet on the scene, Amanda Gorman. She's this beautiful young poet. I don't know how old she is, but she wrote a poem and she recited her poem called The Hill We Climb. And I believe the hill we climb is the upward struggle. It's a metaphorical hill, an upward struggle that most people with dark skin have to make. They have to try harder than people who look alike and sound alike. If you look different, you have to try harder. And of course, that's true for people with dark skin. It's true for Native American Indians. It's true for Indians from India because they have darker skin. It's true for anybody with an accent. It is true for a lot of people. The hill we climb is bigger, harder hill. But she's very positive. So this was at President Biden's inauguration. Inaugurations are always January 20th. And this was from 2021. The hill we climb. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just is, isn't always just justice. And yet the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl, descended from slaves and raised by a single mother, can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose. I like the way she plays with words. To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree. And of course, that's a metaphor that is used in the Old Testament over and over again to refer to a time of peace when everyone sits under their own vine and under their own fig tree. She's a Catholic. Her entire Catholic congregation was watching her give this, and we're quite proud of her. That everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we are to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. Right. All the mistakes we make, they have to clean up. But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. And every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our peoples diverse and beautiful, will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it, to be the light. I like the Christian imagery in this poem. It, of course, is very modern. There isn't really much rhyme or meter or anything like that. The beauty lies in the word choices. And I think she's doing quite well. I think she became famous that day. American poets, what about Ralph Waldo Emerson? This poem, I don't believe it's in our 101 poems, and so I presented it in class here because it's a great poem. It really is. It's called What is Success by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it's a really good example of his work. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the approbation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to give of one's self, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to have played and laughed with enthusiasm and sung with exultation, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded, excuse me. And I do believe this is a great poem. I don't see that Emerson lived this poem. You would think by reading this poem that he turned out to be someone who went around trying to make life easier for everyone else. You just imagine him as a volunteer for the poor or something. And of course, that's not what he did. Romanticism is quite a selfish world view, because you end up using people because you move forward all the time, following your heart. But it's a beautiful poem. All right, William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth was mentioned in one of those essays that I read you. from one of my prior students. William Wordsworth wrote his magnum opus, Lyrical Ballads. It was published in 1798. For the first time, he went through it over and over and over. If you get the Lyrical Ballads and you get the Norton Critical Edition, you read it and then you read it again and then you read it again. He edited it, and rather than print the 6,000 line poem one time and show all the additions in the text, that's what I thought I was buying when I ordered this book. You have to read it over and over and over again, because he just kept changing it. He just kept changing it. But this is another poem, and you have to see that this is not about God. This is about nature, and this is where to go get your wisdom and how to get healed, and where to go for advice and all of that. And so it's called The Table's Turned. He's turning the table on all of these religious people who believe God is the answer. The table's turned. Up, up, my friend, and quit your books, or surely you'll grow double. Up, up, my friend, and clear your looks. Why all this toil and trouble? The sun above the mountain's head, a freshening luster mellow, through all the long green fields has spread his first sweet evening yellow. Books, 'tis a dull and endless strife. Come, hear the woodland linnet. How sweet his music! On my life, there's more wisdom in it. So there's more wisdom in listening to the bird sing than in your book. And hark, how blithe the throstle sings, another bird. He too is no mean preacher. Come forth into the light of things. Let nature be your teacher. She has a world of ready wealth, our minds and hearts to bless. Spontaneous wisdom, breathed by health, truth breathed by cheerfulness. One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good, than all the sages can. Sages are the wise people. Sweet is the lore which nature brings. Our meddling intellect misshapes the beauteous forms of things. We murder to dissect. Enough of science and of art. Close up those barren leaves. Come forth and bring with you a heart that watches and receives. All right, what's Wordsworth's advice to us here? I have bolded a few words. These are words that are typically part of the Christian worldview: wisdom, preachers, coming forth into the light, teaching, and I highlighted the word she in line 17 because nature now has been personified. She with a capital H, like a name, and bless and wisdom. These are generally set aside for Christian use. Moral evil and good, these are usually Christian phrases. And here, Wordsworth is applying all of these to nature. Nature has wisdom, and she's no mean preacher. It means she's no common preacher. She's no lesser preacher. Come forth into the light. You want to be a bright, come into the light. Get out of the dark ages of Christianity. Let nature be your teacher, rather than the Bible or a preacher or an elder person or a parent. And that nature is going to bless you. And spontaneous wisdom, breathed by health. You'll just spontaneously get wisdom. You'll get answers from inside yourself. And you'll learn about moral evil and good. So that's something to think over. This is not American. William Wordsworth was British, and this is but his poetry is very important because he was extremely influential on Ralph Waldo Emerson and then Henry David Thoreau. All right, we're switching gears completely here and going to the Constitution. You've got your Constitution. We're going to be looking at the Constitution, which is in your syllabus on pages 128 and 130. All right, the 10th Amendment. Let's look at the 10th Amendment. This is on page 128. It's very short, but it's important that you understand what the 10th Amendment is. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. All right, this is a very important amendment, the 10th Amendment. This says if something is not mentioned in the Constitution, then the states get to decide. If it's not in the Constitution, the states will each decide. And of course, the Southern states, this was their kind of war cry before the Civil War, to say the 10th Amendment says we get to decide. Slavery is not perfectly expressed in the Constitution. We get to decide, and we decide we want slaves. And we simply decided that it was worth the possible division of our nation to abolish slavery. We knew, people knew, even before the Civil War, it was going to be a horrible mark on our American history. It was going to be something everyone would be ashamed of. All right, now let's go forward to page 130 and read the 14th Amendment. And we're reading just section 1. And I hope you have this all marked up by now. The 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. You need to highlight or underline those. Nor shall any state, deprive life, liberty, or property without due process of law, circle, mark that up, due process, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And this particular clause, equal protection, has been used or misused repeatedly in the last 50 years. It's been misused in the last 60 years, 70 years. It's been misused repeatedly. The idea that due process of law apply means that you will have privacy, believing that you find privacy there in that clause, in that section 1 of Amendment 14. And look at the date, 1868. This is 3 years after the Civil War ended. And of course, Jim Crow laws that we'll be talking about later when we get into Uncle Tom's Cabin. Jim Crow laws misuse and abuse the 14th Amendment to say, well, we are separate. We are separating people by color, but it's equal, separate but equal. And they believe they're fulfilling the 14th Amendment where it says equal protection of the laws. Now, when we apply this to people of color, you can't say separate but equal. You just can't do that. You have to let everybody use the same schools, the same libraries, the same buses, the same restaurants. You can't say we'll give them their own restaurant, but it'll be separate but equal. This has been picked up on by the LGBTQ plus, the alphabet, the whole alphabet syndrome there. This has been picked up by that movement. And the problem with applying this was made to not allow racism. But was it really made to say that you cannot say, for example, no LGBTQ people can run Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts? Is it really just the same as saying a Black man cannot be a leader for the Boy Scout? Is it the same thing to say, for example, a transgender, a lady who thinks she's a man, run a Boy Scout troop? Or let's put it the easier way to see what evil could be involved. Is it the same as discrimination based on skin color to say that a transgender woman, a person who looks like a woman now or kind of does, but is actually biologically a man, and allow that person to be a Girl Scout leader? Is that morally correct? Is that a good idea? And we are seeing this play out continuously right now in, for example, female sports, where we have a basketball team just this week who just conceded. They were playing basketball and there was a transgender player, so a biological male playing on a female college team, and he injured one of the players so badly that the player team where the player got hurt just said, we give up, you guys win, and they just walked away. And we have, of course, the swimmer, the famous swimmer, who was 400th in the men's competition, and now in the women's competition he could win everything. He's 6'2". He's a foot taller than most of the little girls on that team, and he can compete as a female. And so we have all of these things. You really apply, does the 14th Amendment apply to that situation? Is sexual orientation the same as skin color? Is it the same thing? And once you apply the 14th Amendment to the LGBTQ alphabet movement, it's going to be really hard to go back. It's going to be really hard to ever go back. So the 14th Amendment, this is what you should have marked in your copy. So this page 130, if you haven't done it yet, please do it right now. The key words here are life, liberty, property. Is a slave your property? Is your fetus, is your unborn child, is that child your property? What about eggs that you donate and have frozen, and then you and your husband get divorced? Are those eggs property? Do we apply the 14th Amendment there? And the idea of due process, without due process of law. So you have the right to a trial and all of that. But does that also mean that does privacy, is that involved here? Nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And so equal protection, and you might make a note in the margin there, is separate but equal. That's what the Southern states said. Well, we are separate, but they're equal. Now they weren't equal, but they were separate. Is it okay to be separate, but say you are equal? The 10th Amendment, you can see the Southern secession in 1860. I found this diagram. You can see that Texas, Florida, everywhere in the gold color, these all were seceding. This is what the Southern states used as their antebellum war cry. The 10th Amendment that said anything not directly mentioned in the Constitution gets to be decided by the states. They seceded, the South did, from the central government on December 20th, 1860. This is just before the Civil War starts. They claimed the other states failed to honor the covenant that had bound the states together. And in particular, that would be the 10th Amendment, to let the states decide. I like it that Oregon is basically still just a territory at this point. 1849 we became a state, but so we're barely a state. We hardly count. With Lincoln's election in 1861, first South Carolina, then Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, etc., became the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. Now, you have to remember, note well, slavery was legal in 13 states between 1820 and 1860. Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. Large plantations that grew cash crops like tobacco or cotton and sugarcane drove the economy of the South. So if we want to explore slavery, you got to follow the money. It's like anything else that's corrupt. Let's follow the money and see what happened. Now, on this little article, this little map, the red places are the free states, the black are the slave states. You can see they're all down south, and green areas are territories. And this is just before the Civil War, just before 1849. So Oregon's a territory here. I'm from Oregon, so I mention Oregon all the time. So large plantations, how do they make their money? Look at the crops: tobacco, cotton, sugarcane. Is that easy to pull up? Is it easy to pick? Is it easy to separate cotton from the cottonseed? No. And that's what drives the economy of the South. In the 1850s, the South provided 75% of the world's cotton, not America's cotton, the world's cotton. In the 1850s, the Mississippi River Valley had more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the world. So they're making a lot of money, and their slaves are living in shacks with dirt floors. This is an old photograph of people picking cotton. You take your basket out there and you pick until you've got your basket full, and you go dump it, and you go back and you pick some more. Eli Whitney and the cotton gin. This was quite interesting. Preparing for this presentation, I found out that Eli Whitney was not a Black person. I thought Eli Whitney was Black. I'm positive we were told that in school. And reading about this recently, I found out that half of America thinks Eli Whitney was Black. because it's more cool if he was black and invented the cotton gin. Anyway, cotton was hard to separate to make it usable. You can see the cotton plant here, and those are just little cotton balls. And then, of course, they, just like wool from a sheep, they kind of rake it out. I don't know the exact term. And then they spin it, and then they spin it into yarns and then weave it into cloth. The cotton gin made cotton much more valuable because it separated the cotton from the seed. It could separate more cotton in one day than 100 slaves could. You could get rich really fast. If you had slaves to pick it and a cotton gin and slaves to run it through that, you could make a lot of money. Okay, Oregon. I was very touched by this gravestone. Aim, a slave of Mary and John Porter. The only names on this gravestone are the names of the owners, Mary and John Porter. Aim, maybe it's Amy, but Aim. As late as 1860, there were a handful of slaves in Oregon. I like to talk about Oregon because I'm in Oregon, and this is where I was born. So there were a handful of slaves in Oregon brought by settlers from Missouri along the Oregon Trail. Some were kept as slaves for 10 years to build farms and then freed. And if nobody did anything about it, they just stayed as slaves, even though there wasn't slavery in Oregon. There actually was. In one 1853 Oregon case, a judge declared Robin Holmes and his children free since slavery was illegal in Oregon. So if you could figure out, especially if you could read, if you could figure out, hey, we're in Oregon now. We have come over from Missouri along the Oregon Trail. That was a big deal, big stinking deal to come over the Oregon Trail. And here we are. And you want me and my kids to still be your slaves. Slavery is not allowed here. So they started challenging people. And I was able to use the Oregon Historical Society to come up with some cool information. I'm only going to talk about these Oregon pioneers that were photographed because I think it's more interesting to see the face behind the words. Oregon pioneers leaving slavery behind. And by this, I mean they come from Missouri or somewhere along the Oregon Trail where slavery was legal, and they come all the way out here to Oregon, and then they're not slaves anymore. This man looks kind of middle-aged. His name is George Washington. Oregonians Sybil Haber of Lakeview, and America Waldo and her family. Her name was America here on the right. America and Richard Bogle in 1884. You may have pictures in your family from this far back. Photography is quite early, and so you had to have a little bit of money to have photos made in 1884. And these are some pretty good photos. You can even see what their homes are like. So pioneer Sybil Haber or Harbor. Different Oregon records have her name with or without that R. Sybil Harbor. Born in 1852 in Missouri, Sybil earned money housekeeping, then later cooking on ranches. She owned a bakery, but the bakery burned down in 1900. She began operating a boarding house then, where you rent a room to someone. She opened a nursery, which is what you would call a hospital because there was no hospital, to take care of pregnant women and then other sick people. She even performed minor surgeries in her home. This is an amazing lady. She died of cancer in 1918. That's the year that World War I ended, at age 67. In 1960, at the age of 88, the Lakeview Examiner, because Sybil was from Lakeview, Oregon, and the newspaper paid this tribute to her son, Bert. So there's her son, Bert, with either a sister or she looks quite a bit younger, with someone. He has never served as mayor of the town or judge of the county, but for many years, Bert Haber was known as one of the most important men of Lake County. Now 88, Bert has been a resident of this county for 74 years, and he is blessed with a keen memory, which keeps alive a vast store of accurate information about Lake County's early days and people. Those who work with titles in land, facts of towns, county history, and the details of people's lives regard the memory works of Bert Haber with respect and esteem. And so they're paying this tribute to Bert, which I think is kind of cool. And even under the photo, it says Bert Harbor, an unknown girl, possibly his sister. And here are America and Richard Bogle. America Waldo was born in Missouri in 1844. Her parentage was most likely a slave mother and one of the Waldo brothers, who were businessmen and slave owners in Missouri. And of course, there's a whole bunch right behind that sentence. Most likely a slave of one of the Waldo brothers. This means that her owner had sons who she probably is half black, half white from one of the brothers and a slave woman. Really hard to imagine to go back just that far in history and think of what life was like for women. Women, of course, are always weaker members who are abused. America came to the Oregon Territory on one of the early wagon trains. Upon arrival, she lived with the family of Daniel Waldo, who staked his claim east of Salem in what is now known as Waldo Hills. And so 1844, that's before Oregon was a state. She came over when Oregon was just a territory, and she came with her slave owners. On January 1, 1863, America married Jamaican immigrant Richard Bogle, a successful barber in Salem. Soon after they wed, they moved to Walla Walla in the Washington Territory. Richard opened a well-respected barbershop on Main Street. The Bogles also became successful and wealthy as ranchers. Richard was one of the founders of the Walla Walla Building and Loan Association. Isn't it amazing? Once they're free, these people are taking every advantage of being in Oregon County, probably getting land and working very, very hard to make something for their children. People used to work hard to leave something for their children. They wanted to pull their children up out of the poverty they were born into, and in this case, even slavery. They lived in Walla Walla until their deaths, America in 1903 and Richard in 1904. That's when my grandparents were born. Of their 8 children, 5 lived into adulthood, and that would be pretty average because of all the childhood diseases. Two of their 3 sons followed in their father's footsteps and became professional barbers in Portland. Be interesting to know, are they still running barbershops? Meet Amanda and Benjamin Johnson. Amanda Gardner Johnson was a slave gifted to Lydia Coram as a wedding present when she married Anderson Deckard. In 1853, the Deckards decided to come to Oregon and offered Amanda her freedom if she wanted to remain in Missouri. So do you want to come with us to Oregon, or you want your freedom here in Missouri? She elected instead to travel over the Oregon Trail with the family. Where is she going to go? Does she know where her family is? She pretty much has to follow them. At least they are a known factor. Free in Oregon, Amanda lived with the Deckards until 1858, when she went to Albany and secured work at the J.H. Foster Home. In 1870, she married former slave and blacksmith Benjamin Johnson. I just think it's a cool picture. The Johnsons lived. This is the death certificate in Lynn County, Oregon, for Amanda Gardner Johnson. The Oregon Historical Society actually has this on file, which is so cool. And it looks like she died of vascular heart disease, like everybody else, the heart problems. The Johnsons lived the rest of their lives on the corner of Elm Street and 7th Avenue Southwest in Albany. And I thought, oh my goodness, wouldn't that be fun to go there and take a picture and see if there is a 100-year-old house, more than 100-year-old house there. Amanda was a widow when she died in Albany, 1927, at age 93, at home from heart disease. All right, now let's meet Robin and Polly Holmes. There's a book called Breaking Chains. I have not read this yet, and I'm not sure if I would like it or if you would like it. Breaking Chains. I may or may not choose to read this later on. In Breaking Chains, Gregory Noakes tells the story of the only slavery case ever adjudicated in Oregon courts, Holmes versus Ford. Drawing on the court record of this landmark case, Noakes offers an intimate account of the relationship between a slave and his master from the slave's point of view. He also explores the experiences of other slaves in early Oregon, examining attitudes toward race and revealing contradictions in the state's history. Robin and Polly Holmes arrived in Oregon in 1844 as the property of Nathaniel Ford. In their mid-30s at the time, they brought with them 3 of their 6 children. Their other 3 children were sold off as slaves in Missouri prior to them leaving. Try to just swallow that little piece of history. Before leaving Missouri, Ford promised the Holmes family their freedom upon arrival if they would help him establish a farm in the Oregon Territory. Settling in the Willamette Valley near Rickreel, Ford built a small cabin for the Holmes, but then he denied the family its promised freedom. By 1850, Robin and Polly had 5 children, and Ford granted them and their infant freedom, but kept their other 4 children as slaves. Harriet, one of the children still held by Ford, died in 1851. Recognizing that Ford would not willingly free the surviving children, Robin began an unprecedented legal battle to get custody of his children. Robin was up against formidable odds. He had lived his life as a slave, raised in slave culture, bought and sold, and he was illiterate. Oh, that's a mark against you if you can't read and write. He was bringing suit to an influential man with powerful connections who was also recently elected to the territorial legislature. And you can see my picture here is from, it's a list of the possessions of his owner. And the one highlighted in blue says Robin Holmes, $655. That's what he paid for him. That's what he's worth along with his other possessions. Robin's attorney argued that Ford unlawfully detained the Holmes' children. After a long legal battle, the Holmes were declared free. I just think, wow, thank you, Lord. The Holmes family moved to Marion County, where they ran a successful plant nursery. Mr. Holmes's 2-page will, drawn up in 1862, leaves his estate to his wife and their 4 children in Salem. And now we come to Mary Jane Holmes Shipley Drake. Mary Jane Holmes Shipley Drake, you have to add all the names, the owners, parents, her maiden name, married name, born in Missouri in 1841, was one of Robin and Polly Holmes's children involved in the Holmeses versus the Fords lawsuit. After Robin and Polly freed their children from Ford, Mary Jane Holmes voluntarily remained with the Fords as a servant for another 4 years. So she probably was allowed to stay there as a servant, either get her room and board. I don't know if she got paid any money, but she had a place to live and probably maybe a room of her own. And then certainly no one could take advantage of her anymore at this point. In 1857, Mary Jane was 16 and wanted to marry Reuben Shipley. Shipley was a former slave from Missouri who was promised his freedom if he would drive a team of oxen to Oregon with his owner, Robert Shipley. True to his word, Reuben was freed after they arrived in the Oregon Territory, and he worked hard to save enough money to purchase a large amount of farmland near Corvallis. And he got 80 acres for $1,500. And I would like to suggest that $1,500 is a whole bunch of money in 1850s. In order to marry Mary Jane, Ford demanded that Reuben pay him $700. That'd be almost $20,000 by today's dollars, even though she had been liberated by the Territorial Supreme Court 4 years earlier. He still says, I want my $700 for her. Regardless, Reuben agreed to pay Ford the money to ensure Mary Jane's freedom. He probably really wanted that receipt. He wanted that receipt. He did not want to worry about his wife getting kidnapped, or he just wanted a way. And so he worked hard. This is the first case of a slave being sold in Oregon. This is the Shipley cabin, built around 1910. Now, at this point in this photo, it's all overgrown and trees are falling on it and the roof's falling apart, but it would have been a beautiful little cabin. It was a landmark for many years with its giant fireplace and its quaint front porch. They had 3 boys and 3 girls, and the family were popular, although they were the only Black family in Benton County. I think they even named a road after them accidentally. I think it was called Darkey Road. And people tried to figure out where that came from, but that was a polite way to, instead of saying Negro, it was polite to say, well, they're darkies. They live on Darkey Road, which is, it's not very nice today, but it's better than calling it Negro Road or something like that. And they were really popular and did really well, even though they were the only Black family in Benton County. Here in Oregon, I suppose that's pretty common for people with dark skin. because everybody here, well, we don't even see sunlight. We don't even get tans. Mary Jane and Reuben had 6 children and became well-respected members of the community. In 1861, that's the year the Civil War started, they donated 3 acres of land from their 80-acre hillside farm for the formation of Mount Union Cemetery in Philomath, Oregon. Calling a cemetery Mount Union implies, of course, that it's northern, and but as long as Black people could be buried there, because Black people couldn't be buried in some cemeteries. And so he donated land for a cemetery. And here's their marker. On May 1861, Reuben and Mary Jane Holmes Shipley, former Negro slaves, deeded from their farm, purchased from Charles Bale's donation land claim, the original plot for this cemetery. Buried in lot 10 are Reuben Shipley, Mary Jane Shipley Drake, Alfred Drake, and the Shipley children, which is kind of cool. After Reuben's death, Mary Jane married R.G. Drake in 1875. Mary Jane Holmes Shipley Drake outlived her second husband and all but one of her children, and she died in 1925. So she lived to be quite an elderly woman. Okay, how about Louis or Louis Alexander Southworth? And we say circa 1830 because many slaves or even just poor people didn't know what year they were born, unless you actually had a birth certificate that would have the date. If you were really poor or if you were Black, you didn't know the year of your birth. You just had to go by whatever your owners or whatever your grandma or your mom or your brother told you. Louis Alexander Southworth was born July 4, 1830 in Tennessee. His father's name was Hunter, but since he was born into slavery, his surname was that of his master, James Southworth. In 1853, Louis and his mother, Pauline, immigrated to Oregon with James Southworth. In biographical accounts, Louis moved to Jacksonville and worked mining gold to earn money for buying his freedom. Imagine working to get your freedom. And here he is as an old man. He's aged quite well. Look at his smile. Louis moved to Eureka, California, sometime around 1858, and made his livelihood playing the violin for local dancing schools, earning the $1,000 necessary to buy his freedom. And that'd be about $27,000 today. Imagine saving up that much money to buy your freedom. After Louis bought his freedom, James Southworth circulated a petition in Lane County to protect slave property. The petition made its way to the state legislature, but it was not adopted, and Louis was free from Southworth. So even after he paid for his freedom, I don't know if he got a receipt or not, but the Southworths wanted a petition. They tried to say he was still their slave, but Louis Southworth won and won his freedom. Amazing how crooked people are just always crooked. In 1868, Louis took up residence in Buena Vista, purchasing land and establishing a blacksmith shop and livery stable. He married Mary Cooper in 1873. Mary had adopted a boy, Alvin McCleary, who was born in San Francisco of Jamaican parents. Taking advantage of the Homestead Act, which had no race restrictions, Louis and his family moved to a homestead near Waldport, where Louis operated a scow, ferrying passengers and cargo across the Alsea River. The Homestead Act in 1862, the act provided that the head of a family or person who had reached the age of 21 could file on 160 acres of land. A fee of $18 was charged, $14 at time of filing, and another $4 upon proof. The homesteader had to be on the land and start improvements within 6 months from their filing date. And he had to plow 10 acres into crops and establish a residence for at least 5 years. My grandma, her dad did that. So my great grandpa did that. You could get the land, but you had to build some kind of a house. Now they did it in Nebraska. My great grandpa did this in Nebraska. And so it was a sod house. It was not made out of wood because there's no wood in Nebraska to make houses. And so they made them out of sod, if you can imagine. But that's a story for another day. That's my grandma, who was born in a sod house. All right, back to Louis, and there he is sitting in his living room, and he's got a picture of Abraham Lincoln above the fireplace, which is kind of cool. During the summers, Southwark worked near Philomath and Corvallis, helping with the hay and wheat harvest to earn money for winter supplies. Between 1880 and 1885, Southworth built a house and a barn, had more than 10 acres of land in cultivation, and 27 acres cleared and sown in grass, and he learned to read. In 2021, the city of Waldport honored Southwark by naming a park after him. The park is being built on land donated for a school by Mr. Southwark previously. Now, he donated land for a school and the school was built, but now the school is long gone, and they're making it into a park and naming it after Southworth, which is pretty cool. And now George Washington, you saw him at the first part of this section. George Washington was one of the early Black settlers in the Pacific Northwest who overcame prejudice and discrimination in order to play a crucial role in settling the Washington Territory. Washington was born in Virginia in 1817. Soon after his birth, his father, a slave, was sold, and his mother left him with a white couple, James and Anna Cochran, who raised him. As a small boy, he lived in Ohio and Missouri. While living in Missouri, the Cochrans petitioned the state on George's behalf, and he was given full rights as a citizen, well, except for the right to vote. If you had dark skin or were a woman, you couldn't vote. At some point, George married local widow Mary Jane Kunis. He was a prominent member of the community and founded the town of Centerville in 1875. The name was changed to Centralia in 1883. So if you've heard of Centralia, Washington, it originally started as Centerville, and this man, George Washington, founded that town, this man who had been born a slave. George Washington died in 1905 at the age of 88 and is remembered as a leading African-American pioneer of the Pacific Northwest. So if you have that name or related to this guy, you should have a lot of pride. People who come from extreme poverty sometimes just work incredibly hard because they want to make life better for their kids, and they are willing to work their fingers to the bone to make that happen. Tom Davis. In 1853, Tom Davis was brought to Oregon from Missouri as chattel and by the widow Arabella Waldo. Now, chattel means a possession. According to accounts of his life, his grandmother died on the trail to Oregon, and a sister named Susan died later in Salem. No record of his sister can be found, and records for Tom cannot be found for this early time period. Tom first appears in the 1870 census, that's taken every 10 years, but his race is listed as white. The subsequent census from 1880 to 1930 do list his race as Black. So maybe they just ask him, and whatever he feels he looks like that day, he just says. I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. In most of these records, it also indicates that he is able to read and write. Since it was generally illegal for slaves to be taught these skills, one is left to assume these are skills he may have acquired after coming to Oregon. He worked as a cook in a number of capacities, from working in a dining car for the railroad to working for a private family. In 1907, Tom purchased a lot in Vancouver and built a small home. At the time of his death in 1930, his property was valued at $2,500. That's a lot of money in 1930. Tom Davis, like $250,000 or $500,000 now. Tom Davis is buried in the Park Hill Cemetery in Vancouver, Washington. Ellender Penelope, or Nellie Matthews. Nellie was reportedly born on the Mask Plantation in North Carolina in 1799. The child of a young slave and her owner, Dudley Mask. Just that these people were born of their masters speaks so much to the trauma that these female slaves had to live through. Just incredible trauma. It is assumed that Nellie worked as a domestic on the plantation as a young woman. So a domestic would be working in the kitchen or something. And then because she was the owner's daughter, even though she would be a slave, they might have been slightly nicer to her, or maybe the owner would, maybe the wife would even be meaner to her. I don't know. You have to think of Abraham and Sarah. She bore 5 children in North Carolina. The 3 oldest are recorded as the offspring of her owner and father, Dudley Byron Mask. He's just listed as the owner and the father. Some records indicate that her younger children, Drury and Marianne's father, was actually Drury Mathis, who resided on a nearby plantation. Because marriage with slaves was illegal, and in most cases, marriage between free persons of different races was also illegal, marriage records to confirm this information do not exist. So if they were married in the eyes of God. Accounts indicate that Nellie and her children were freed when Dudley Mask died in 1830. Thank you, Lord. An 1830 census record listing free colored persons shows Eleander Mathis, a female between the age 24 and 35, and 2 females under the age of 10 in her household. North Carolina prohibited freed slaves from remaining in the state for more than 90 days. So the family appears to have moved to Tennessee. Well, wasn't that nice of North Carolina? So as soon as you're freed, you've got to get out of the, not town, but out of the state within 90 days. So you just start out with nothing in nowhere, somewhere you're not even familiar with. Sometime in the 1840s, they moved to Missouri. And in her mid-50s, Nellie undertook the long migration to Oregon with her extended family. Nellie is listed in the census from 1850 to 1880 as living in the household of her oldest son, John. Her race is indicated as M for mulatto, which means part white, part black. In most census entries, except 1960, when she's listed as black. She died in 1882 and is buried in the John Matthews Pioneer Cemetery in Eagle Point, Oregon. And there she is, Eleander Nellie Matthews, mother of John. John, the firstborn child of Eleander Penelope Matthews, was born on March 2, 1816 in Montgomery County, North Carolina. According to some family histories, he was taught to read and write by his father and slave owner Byron Dudley Mask, despite the fact that teaching slaves these skills was specifically prohibited by law in North Carolina. And believe me, learning how to read and write was the key. That was the key to get out of slavery and to have a better life. Just like when anyone else comes to America, learning how to read and write English, that's the key. John does not appear to be listed with his mother in the 1830 census, and the assumption is that he and his brother may have been living somewhere else. Sometime after the family was granted their freedom in 1830, he moved to Tennessee. In October of 1837, he married Eliza Rachel Woolley. Although the records are inconsistent, it would appear that Eliza was white and they had 15 children. And all the names of all 15 children are known. This is just amazing at the Oregon archives, the history that is available. And this is John Dudley. He's playing a flute here in this picture. And this is his obituary. Matthews, on Butte Creek, August 12, 1885, of typhoid fever. John Matthews, aged about, I think it's 76 years old, something like that. So he died of typhoid. A lot of people died of typhoid. William John Livingstone. William Livingstone was born into slavery in Missouri in 1836. By 1863, Livingstone was freed, so now he's only 30 years old. He was freed during the Civil War by his owner, Judge Joseph Ringo. In 1864, he came to Oregon as a free man with former owner Ringo and his family, who settled in the Oregon City area in Clackamas County. Sources indicate Livingstone was given 40 acres of property in the Clarks area, southeast of Oregon City. Livingstone was an industrious and successful businessman. As a hostler, he transported wood and lumber from the bluffs in Oregon City to the buildings being built in what is now known as the old downtown area. If you know Oregon City, there's an upper Oregon City and a lower Oregon City. Livingstone was also a successful farmer, landowner, and a prominent member of the state Grange. He bought and sold property on multiple occasions in the Clackamas County area and beyond. In July of 1884, Livingstone became the mortgage holder for some property in Oregon City for 2 other local residents. So he bought houses and rented them or sold them as mortgages where they pay monthly like most of us do. Duncan Cameron and J.E. Coates for a total sum of $1,599 plus interest. According to Livingstone's will, at the time of his death, he owned 160 acres of property in Lake County, as well as 100 shares of the Ogle Creek Mining Company located near Molalla. He also owned a life insurance policy through the Grange Insurance Company, and his estate was valued at $15,000. Now that's over $360,000 by today's value. Livingstone's estate was eventually settled by his son and heir, Charles Livingstone, in 1916. Sources indicate that hundreds of people attended William Livingstone's funeral, and that's kind of a mark of success and being well liked or being kind. His story illustrates the opportunity that a motivated, business-minded former slave could potentially carve out in the early decades of the state of Oregon. Livingstone's earliest appearance in Clackamas County's deed records show him selling a total of 128 acres of property located southeast of Oregon City to the very man who had previously owned him as a slave in Missouri. Okay, I just had to share those stories of slavery in Oregon. It is amazing. So only one slave was actually ever sold in Oregon, and that's the slave who bought his own wife, who was free anyway. All right, let's talk about American literary romanticism. You're writing the paper, following the, that we're getting there. And let's talk about what do we see in literature where we're not going to see, the primary purpose is not going to be to glorify God. That's not it. We're past that. It's characterized by complicated plots, really good complicated plots. Early American literary romanticism is awesome. These are the books that you love to read, books like Uncle Tom's Cabin, which will be coming up in a little while. Very well developed characters. For example, Uncle Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Unusual characters, exotic settings. For example, the Deep South in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Traditional morality, which we would call, in other words, biblical morality. Sin nature might be recognized, and there are literary Christ types as heroes. For example, Uncle Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin, he's the hero. He's the main character of the book. He's the hero. He is there to teach us what living as a Christian is supposed to be like. He is a literary Christ type, Uncle Tom. Traditional means Christian. Early American romantic plots vary, of course, depending on whether they're written by Christians or not. If it's written by a Christian, you might see its sin nature shown, and the person does something bad and then has to repent later and wish they hadn't done it and things like that. If it's not, if they don't have a Christian background, then it's getting more headed toward what we see in Romanticism today, where God isn't even part of the picture. We see multi-layered plots, complicated plots, or as in Uncle Tom's Cabin, or in, for example, The Last of the Mohicans. And stories contain characters with heroes that are worthy of imitation. These well-developed characters, if they're written by Christians or just with Christian morality, the heroes are worthy of imitation. Read Uncle Tom's Cabin. You want to be like Uncle Tom. Hopefully you'll never be sold as a slave and have to sacrifice your life for everybody else and be beaten so that other people are not beaten, and be the shining example and change the lives of all the white people who ever come into contact with you. Hopefully you won't have a hard life like that. Uncle Tom is very much like Joseph in Egypt, very much like Joseph in Egypt, and he is a definite literary Christ type. The characters teach right and wrong by example and provide that moral compass. Bad guys teach us what to do. The good guys teach us what to do. The bad guys teach us what not to do. They're very often idealistic or larger than life. So they're extreme versions because that's more fun. And they might be literary Christ types. We see unusual characters. In American early Romanticism, you might have a kidnapped soldier's daughters, a chivalrous knight, a noble Native American Indian, a fair Saxon maiden, or a Jewish girl, a family stuck in an ongoing feud. Stereotype themes provide us with social lessons. Sometimes in things like Tarzan or The Last of the Mohicans, it's not a traditional Christian morality. We see greedy white people, ruthless to the natives. That's in the Tarzan stories, or in Last of the Mohicans. The ruthless white people are ruining it for everybody. The Saxons are more noble than the conquering nobles in Walter Scott's Ivanhoe. And in Dickens' novels, of course, these are British for another class, the British class system fails. It's shown that it just doesn't work. And I'm so glad we don't do that in America, have a class system. And you got to be willing to take action. These are different stereotypes we're going to see. For example, exotic settings. All right, Early American Romanticism has cruel settings, a deep South plantation or a native forest, deep in the forest, filled with people at war with one another, or an English family of girls, or a tribal setting, complete with torture. If you want to read Cooper's Last of the Mohicans, you've got torture and the whole bit. You know, one guy being burned at the stake, and as a favor, his friend, who can't save him from being burned at the stake, fires one shot from far away, right through his head to put him out of his misery, things like that. And girls being captured by natives, and one just won't have to do with it. One is fights for her freedom, and the other just can't take it. Castles, medieval times, tournaments, we see that in Ivanhoe. And so the settings are the distant past or the historic past, or even futuristic. If the author is Christian or had Christian parents where they're still trying to live a Christian morality, whether or not they're actually a born-again Christian, we see traditional morality. So there are heroes worthy of imitation. Uncle Tom, noble Uncle Tom, the young virtuous Eliza, a young abused slave, moral slaveholders who question slavery, the noble intelligent slave, the lazy Southern belle, the disgusted Northern visitor. We're going to meet all of these people in Uncle Tom's Cabin. We do see traditional morality. The Northern aunt who comes visiting is just disgusted with slavery. And the lazy Southern belle, the Northern aunt, is just disgusted with the Southern belle, because it takes all types of slaves just to do her hair and do her clothes and take care of her babies. She can't take care of her own children. And the Northern, think of somebody from Oregon or Washington coming into Alabama or Louisiana in the 1850s, and they would think, oh my goodness, this has made you, slavery is ruining you. It's bad for the poor people, and it's bad for you, it's ruining you. Anti-heroes develop and religious characters are trivialized as we progress with Romanticism. And of course, you can't do this by dates, it's more by authors and book titles. In non-Christian literature, the hero scorns the useless Christian. In Ivanhoe, the only Christian in the book is absolutely useless. Useless. He's in the forest trying to sing hymns, and he's just absolutely useless. He's shown in a situation where he just can't cope. And Huck Finn's aunts, and when we get to Huckleberry Finn, his aunts are the religious characters, and they are just fools. Ivanhoe and Sir Brian de Bois Guilbert, who is a knight, but he's a bad guy. Sin nature might be recognized. Occasionally, Christian authors write real moral characters into their plots. For example, Harriet Beecher Stowe with Uncle Tom. C.S. Lewis writes real characters. Tolkien, Randy Alcorn. But for the most part, Christian characters now, especially if you fast forward all the way to now, 2022, Christian characters are useless or they're insane. Think of the evil priest. You see a movie or a show or something, and the bad guy, the evil serial murderer, is really the priest. Excuse me, or insane, marginalized, or an evil stereotype. As Romanticism progresses, the influence of Christianity becomes more and more vague until it's almost gone. Christianity is no longer even mentioned. It's useless. Okay, what is Romanticism? We're looking at our glossary. It's biblical principles turned upside down. That's what G.K. Chesterton said, that Romanticism was biblical principles turned upside down. So if a biblical principle is to marry someone before you sleep with them, then Romanticism, is going to be the opposite of that. So Romanticism is going to say, follow your heart and stay with a woman until your heart's not there anymore. And then you've got to follow your heart, of course, and go find someone else. You've always got to follow your heart. For example, the theist looks at nature and worships God, admiring his creativity and his genius through his creation. If you ever take Brit Lit, Alexander Pope, in his essay on man, said the Christian looks through nature to nature's God. The romantic worships nature. They look at nature and see how awesome it is, and they say, Mother, or Gaia, or whatever they call her, Mother Nature, and they follow their heart. And that, of course, is going to happen in Self-Reliance, which we are reading this week. And you can read it with me. Be sure you have your copy ready now. We'll be there in a few minutes. Emotions and intuition are key for a romantic. The theist follows certain principles of truth regardless of his heart. Do you think you could do that? Could you operate regardless of your heart? When you know you have to do something, can you do it? Knowledge comes from self-realization in Romanticism. The Transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, were also Romantics, but they had their own focus on transcending over scientific realism through intuition and instinct. Intuition and instinct, those are key words for Romantics and especially for the Transcendentalists. Intuition, your gut instinct, intuition. This movement began in America with Emerson and Thoreau in the 1820s and the 1830s. You must know this. Romantic literature is always idealistic and optimistic. Every television show you watch now is romantic. No matter how much they risk, the good guy survives until the end. They're very optimistic. The settings are fascinating or far away or fantastical. We're going to be reading Self-Reliance this week. Emerson was one of the most influential lecturers and essayists in this country during his lifetime. His fascination with Eastern religious and philosophical belief sets him apart from the other writers of his time. He was fascinated with Eastern religions. He didn't really learn enough to become an expert. He just learned enough to get all messed up. While others explored mankind and how the world works, Emerson was studying himself. Emerson considered Judeo-Christian theology, so Jewish Christian theology, to be Western mythology. We have writers today who call Christianity, oh, well, that's your own mythology. Along with worldwide trading came books filled with Eastern thought. His father was a Unitarian minister who read widely and brought these books home. Entering Harvard at age 14, Waldo, as he preferred, studied the literary works of Asia and Persia, including a 14th century Muslim poet, Hafiz, who lived back in the 1300s. India, poets and philosophers, India, Greece, Rome, everything. In an age of colonialism, Emerson encouraged Indians, people from India, to cast off the shackles of the British Empire and the superstitious Western theology. Imagine calling Western theology and Christianity superstition. Emerson followed in his father's footsteps and became a Unitarian minister. Emerson lost his father at age 11. 3 brothers predeceased him and lost his own son. He lost his own son at age 5. So he had lots of heartbreak. And that either makes you or breaks you. All of that heartache, you either turn against God or you just accept his will and the fact that God knew when that child was born, he would only live to age 5. Do you fight God or do you go with it and realize we are like a vapor? We're like a blade of grass. We're like a fading flower. We're only here for a while. And the whole idea of all the loss we suffer, now you're getting some of my seminary. This is from Old Testament, the book of Job. Normally this comes up as Job suffers so much loss. You have to realize God did not promise us we ought to keep everybody. And unfortunately, 10 out of every 10 people die. So then he married Ellen Tucker Emerson in 1829, and she died a short while later in 1831 from TB, and then he just quit the pulpit. So she had tuberculosis. She had it when they got married, and they were hoping, they tried all types of things to keep her alive, but she died from TB. Emerson no longer believed that Jesus was divine, and he refused to administer communion. So they threw him out of the church. Traveling to Europe, he met with William Wordsworth, the poet. Trust yourself. This cemented the mobilization of Romanticism to America. So through William Wordsworth and Emerson, that's how Romanticism comes over here. When he returned to Concord, Massachusetts, he married again, and he began a 50-year lecturing career. And in 1836, he published Nature. Along with Emerson, the New England Transcendentalists included Bronson Alcott. Think of Louisa May Alcott, Little Women, Little Men, all those fun books, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller. Their philosophical belief in spiritual idealism valued intuition of the 5 senses. By interpreting Christian theology and the Bible as just another world religion, Emerson shook the foundations of New England religious belief. He believed that you could just simply substitute Jehovah for Brahma in Eastern texts. So you could go to Buddhist texts, and everywhere that it said Brahma, you could just write Jehovah, and it would be the same thing. I do like this quote. What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. A lot of truth in this one. Emerson often walked 5 miles out of his way to visit Ellen's grave. Now, this is his first wife. Before he remarried again, he would walk 5 miles out of his way. A year after her death, he just couldn't take it anymore and he dug her up. Yes. Death is really, really tough, but leave them in the grave. He's not the only poet, philosophical thinker to dig up his wife. Edgar Allan Poe did this. There are at least 3 or 4 other poets who dug up their loved ones. They just couldn't leave them there. The first journal passages that later became Self-Reliance were penned in 1832. And that's what we're reading this week, 3 years after Ellen's death. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. All right, it's time to open up your Dover edition, whether it looks like mine or has a different picture, but it says Ralph Waldo Emerson, Self-Reliance and Other Essays, and I'm giving you the page numbers. I want you to get your pen or your highlighter or something, and you go to Dover edition, page 19, and I'm going to give you some key quotes, and if you pay attention to the page numbers, you can follow along with me, and you can mark these in the margin or highlight whole sections so that you can get the best out of Self-Reliance. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you and your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. And that is in the Dover edition, page 19, the very first page of the essay. Page 20, and this is, I'm looking for where it is on the page. That imitation is suicide. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within. He's talking about intuition, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought because it is his. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance and that an imitation is suicide. And that is at the top of the page. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's about line 8, the second sentence of the second paragraph on page 20. Imitation is suicide. You have to know that. You must recognize that that's Ralph Waldo Emerson. You have to know that that's from Self-Reliance. You have to know that. Imitation is suicide. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Trust thyself is almost the middle of the page. It is the very first 2 words of the third paragraph on page 20. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. And let's see, the virtue. This is 2/3 of the way down, page 21. The virtue in most request is conformity. Self-reliance is its aversion. It loves not realities and creators, but names and customs. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. This is almost getting to Friedrich Nietzsche, this idea. Well, you tell me this is bad and this is good. I have to find out for myself if I think what you say is good is actually good. Absolve you to yourself, page 21, and you shall have the suffrage of the world. I remember an answer which, when quite young, I was prompted to make to a valued advisor who was wont to importune me with the dear old doctrines of the church. On my saying, what have I to do with the sacredness of traditions if I live wholly from within? My friend suggested, but these impulses may be from below, not from above. So he said, I've got to live by my own impulses. And his friend said, well, what if your impulses aren't good? They're from below, from Satan. I replied, they do not seem to me to be such, but if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. Good and bad are but names very readily transferable to that or this. The only right is what is after my constitution. This is saying good is what I think is good. Bad is what I think is bad. And that's Friedrich Nietzsche will say that 100 years later. To be great, this is my favorites. To be great is to be misunderstood. That's from page 25. I hope in these days we have heard the last of conformity and consistency. Let the words be gazetted and ridiculous henceforward. Instead of the gong for dinner, let us hear a whistle from the Spartan fife. Let us bow and apologize nevermore. A great man is coming to eat at my house. I do not wish to please him. I wish that he should wish to please me. The inquiry leads us to that source at once, the essence of genius, the essence of virtue, and the essence of life, which we call spontaneity or instinct. We denote this primary wisdom as intuition, whilst all later teachings are tuitions. All right, so your intuition, your gut, what if you lived by spontaneity? It could get pretty messed up pretty quick, couldn't it? Page 29. He cannot be happy and strong until he too lives with nature in the present, above time. Page 29. We shall not always set so great a price on a few texts, on a few lives. We are like children who repeat by rote the sentences of grandams and tutors. We shall not always set so great a price on a few texts, on a few lives. Oh, here's a repetition, excuse me. This one fact the world hates, that the soul becomes, for that forever degrades the past, turns all riches to poverty, all reputation to a shame, confounds the saint with the rogue, shoves Jesus and Judas equally aside. And page 30 and 31, I see the same law working in nature for conservation and growth, the poise of a planet, the bended tree recovering itself from the strong wind. The vital resources of every animal and vegetable are also demonstrations of the self-sufficing and therefore self-relying soul. And remember, the name of this essay is Self-Reliance. Bid them take the shoes off from their feet, for God is here within. So he's thinking about Exodus 3, where God tells Moses, take the shoes off your feet, this is holy. And he says, no, you guys take off your feet. God's here inside me, I'm the Holy One. I like the silent church before the service begins better than any preaching. I must be myself. I cannot break myself any longer for you or you. If you can love me for what I am, we shall be happier. Pages 32, 33, and 35. And truly it demands something godlike in him who has cast off the common motives of humanity and has ventured to trust himself for a taskmaster, that with the exercise of self-trust, new powers shall appear, that a man is the word made flesh. Wow. A man is the word made flesh. This is right from John, John 1:1. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God. And let's see, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. And he is saying that a man is the word made flesh, born to shed healing to the nations. It is easy to see that a greater self-reliance, again, book title, a new respect for the divinity in man must work a revolution in all the offices and relations of men. As men's prayers are a disease of the will, so are their creeds a disease of the intellect. Insist on yourself, never imitate. Some people get really hyped up on this and just want to adopt everything Emerson says, but this is quite a problem. Prayers are a disease of the will, that you're praying, you think there's someone there to pray for. And creeds, for example, the Apostles' Creeds, reciting theology, a disease of the intellect. Abide in the simple and noble regions of thy life. Obey thy heart, and thou shalt reproduce the foreworld again. If you obey your heart, what would happen if each of us left here today and we just obeyed our heart? You can see that we would have moral chaos. So abide in the simple and noble regions of thy life. Obey thy heart, and thou shalt reproduce the foreworld again. But not so, O friends. I will the God deign to enter and inhabit you, but by a method precisely the reverse. It is only as a man puts off from himself all external support and stands alone that I see him to be strong and to prevail. Do not believe it. It can never be so. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. Try that when the person you have loved for 50 years is dying. Look for peace within yourself or in the triumph of principles. Okay, what is Romanticism? Characters are bigger than life. Characters are usually rebels against the establishment, against tradition, against Christianity. Plots are complicated. We've got multiple subplots, very similar to Shakespeare, interwoven to create suspense or tension until the end. That's why early Romanticism is so good. Storylines may flow for months or years or even generations. Good Romanticism, real good stories combine Romanticism with realism. You have enough realism to make it not too good to be true, but enough Romanticism that you're happy you read the story. They combine interesting features of both realism and Romanticism. Tolkien and Lewis always include a theistic worldview, so the characters portray both regenerated and unregenerated mankind. Think of the Tolkien Lord of the Rings series or C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. You have people that are regenerated, which would be born again, and unregenerated, people who are not born again, the evil characters. And you have the battle of good against evil, usually with an old-fashioned traditional theistic hero. Now, Romanticism, we have to give Jean-Jacques Rousseau some credit also. This, you can see, is way before William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth penned that lyrical ballads, the 6,000-line poem about himself, in 1798. And you can see that that's when Rousseau dies. But Rousseau, I have a copy of this on my bookshelf. This is so good reading. It's funny. It's quite funny in light of Christianity. But Rousseau writes the Confessions of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So he's French. And of course, the Confessions, I believe that he's making fun of Augustine's Confessions from AD 400. Augustine had the first type journal confessing, God, you knew what I needed before you called me. You knew how to bring me to you. You knew I would do this. You knew I would do that. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau here is making fun of all of that. And in his confession, he's confessing how awesome he is himself personally. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Rousseau's autobiography, The Confessions, planted the seeds of Romanticism with the following words. So this is the very beginning of the book, if you go to the library and want to look at it. I am commencing an undertaking, hitherto without precedent, and which will never find an imitator. I desire to set before my fellows the likeness of a man in all the truth of nature, and that man, myself alone. I know the feelings of my heart, and I know men. I am not made like any of those I have seen. I venture to believe that I am not made like any of those who are in existence. If I am not better, at least I am different. Okay, so what's Romanticism? And this again is from the glossary. An artistic and intellectual movement originating in Europe in the late 18th century. That means the late 1700s, and that means William Wordsworth. And characterized by a heightened interest in nature, an emphasis on the individual's expression of emotion and imagination, a departure from the attitudes and forms of classicism, and rebellion against established social rules and conventions. This marks the revolution of the hierarchy conception. And what is the hierarchy conception? You can only hope that you are artistic enough to be able to draw like Mrs. E. Here on the left, we have the hierarchy conception as it was conceptualized by people from basically the beginning of time, especially in the Middle Ages, but up until the time of Romanticism. If the hierarchy conception is a triangle, and it's sometimes shown as chains, sometimes the triangle is the easiest, and for me, this is the easiest for me. So you have God at the top. The least important thing in the entire world is the earth because it's inanimate. And then you have plants, I forgot to put plants there, and then you have animals, and then you have children in general, women in general, men in general. And then you would divide up all the men into, knights, kings, priests, bishops, popes. The pope might be at the top there, or the king might be right under Mary and Jesus, kind of depending who the pope or king was, how strong they were. And then Jesus and Mary and angels, because Mary is the mother of God. So Mary might even be above Jesus in some of these diagrams. And then God is at the very, very top. If you talk about the revolution of the hierarchy conception, turn that triangle upside down, and what is at the bottom and what's at the top? And that's where we remain today. The earth is at the very top, and God is at the very bottom, if he's even in the triangle image. This is the hierarchy conception in a nutshell, simplified for you. God is at the bottom if he's even there. And at this point now, the earth is the most important. If you think the earth is temporal, you're not as concerned. If you think the earth is the only thing we've got for generations and generations, and the rest of eternity, then the earth becomes a lot more important. And animals and children very often are elevated. What do the children want? Are they old enough to make all these decisions for themselves? And we think, yes, they are. The childlike mind is better than the adult. And of course, women were oppressed for so long that women are now highlighted generally more often than men. And titles mean less and less to us. And Jesus, God, and Mary are for fairy tales and things like that. Okay, we're going to stop right here today, and we'll pick up next week where we're leaving off now. And the Lord bless you, and may you have a wonderful, awesome week. Have fun reading with me. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Self-Reliance. Okay, Lord bless you.